A single Benjamin Franklin. That's all it cost to buy the 80-acre Farnsworth property at a county tax auction. It was the joke of upstate New York, until the new owner pried up the rotted floorboards of the milking barn and unearthed a secret that tore a town apart. The Oswego County Courthouse was sweltering that Tuesday morning in October. David Mercer sat in the back row, a 32-year-old mechanic drowning in medical debt following his late mother's battle with cancer. He had exactly $400 to his name, folded neatly in his front pocket. He wasn't there to buy a dream home. He was there out of sheer, desperate curiosity, hoping to secure a tiny, forgotten scrap of land he could flip for a quick profit to keep the bank from repossessing his own house. The auctioneer, a tired-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses, droned through the list of foreclosed properties. Most went to corporate developers or local landlords. Then came item 42, the Farnsworth tract. 80 acres. Route 104, a murmur rippled through the small crowd. The Farnsworth place was infamous. Abandoned since the late 1980s after old Elias Farnsworth vanished without a trace, the property was considered a toxic liability. The soil was supposedly ruined from illegal chemical dumping. The farmhouse had burned to the ground a decade ago, and the massive dairy barn was on the verge of collapse. The county had placed a starting bid of $10,000. Silence. No one raised a paddle. $5,000, the auctioneer offered, wiping his brow. Nothing. $1,000. Crickets. The local developers sneered. Buying the Farnsworth place meant inheriting a demolition bill that would bankrupt a small company. Do I have $100? The auctioneer sighed, looking ready to strike the property from the docket. Just to clear the paperwork, $100. David's hand shot up before his brain could process the risk. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. Going once, going twice. Sold, God help you, son. As the gavel slammed down, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. In walked Charles Moreau, the CEO of Moreau Heritage Real Estate, his face flushed red, out of breath, and flanked by two men in dark suits. Item 42, Moreau barked, his voice echoing off the marble floors. I bid $50,000 for the Farnsworth tract. The auctioneer looked up, shaking his head. You're 5 minutes late, Mr. Moreau. The gavel has fallen. It just went for $100 to the gentleman in the back. Moreau's head snapped toward David. For a split second, the polished, aristocratic facade of the wealthy developer slipped, revealing a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Within minutes, David was cornered in the courthouse hallway. Moreau didn't bother with pleasantries. He pulled out a checkbook and a gold fountain pen. Listen to me, Mr. Mercer, Moreau said, his tone slick but his eyes darting nervously. You're a mechanic, right? You don't want that land. The EPA is going to fine whoever owns it for the soil contamination. I'll write you a check right now for $10,000. You walk away with a $9,900 profit for 5 minutes of your time. Everyone wins. David looked at the checkbook, then up at Moreau's sweating forehead. Why would a multimillionaire rush to an auction, arrive late, and instantly offer $10,000 for a supposedly toxic, worthless plot of land? I think I'll hold on to it for a bit, David said slowly, stepping around the men. I've always wanted a farm. 20,000! Moreau snapped, grabbing David's forearm. His grip was surprisingly tight. Don't be a fool, Mercer. You don't know what you're dealing with. Let go of me, David warned, pulling his arm away. The land is mine. That afternoon, David drove his beat-up Ford truck down the overgrown dirt driveway of the Farnsworth property. The rumors were right. The place was a nightmare. Thickets of briars choked the skeletons of rusted tractors. The foundation of the burned-out farmhouse was filled with stagnant black water. But it was the barn that drew his attention. It was massive, nearly 100 feet long, its red paint peeled grey, leaning heavily to the left like a wounded animal. David grabbed a heavy crowbar and a heavy-duty flashlight from his truck and pushed open the massive sliding door. The smell of decades-old hay, bat guano, and rotting wood hit him like a physical blow. Shafts of pale autumn sunlight pierced the roof, illuminating floating dust motes. He walked the length of the central corridor, kicking aside rusted milking stanchions. Why did Moreau want this place so badly, he thought. There was nothing here but decay. As he reached the far end, near what used to be the tack room, David noticed something strange. The entire barn had a dirt and rotted wood floor, but this specific 10-by-10 corner was poured concrete. And the concrete wasn't flush with the walls. There was a half-inch gap all the way around, filled with hardened black pitch. David tapped the concrete with his crowbar. It didn't yield a solid thud. It gave a hollow, resonating clank. His heart began to pound. He swung the heavy iron crowbar down with all his strength. The concrete chipped. He swung again and again, sweat soaking his shirt despite the chill in the air. On the 12th strike, a massive chunk of the concrete broke away, revealing that it wasn't a solid floor at all. It was a concrete slab, poured over a thick iron trapdoor. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to ensure whatever was under this barn stayed buried forever. It took David 3 hours, a sledgehammer, and a mechanical winch attached to his truck's bumper to finally pull the heavy iron door free. With a horrific screech of rusted hinges, the slab was dragged upward, revealing a gaping black hole in the earth. A rush of cold, stale air expelled from the darkness, carrying the metallic scent of old brass and damp stone. David shined his heavy-duty flashlight down into the abyss. A set of steep, concrete stairs spiraled downward. He climbed down slowly, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, the beam of his flashlight cut through the absolute darkness, revealing a subterranean room that defied logic. This wasn't a root cellar. The walls were reinforced with thick steel beams, and the floor was lined with meticulously laid brick. In the center of the room sat a massive antique Mosler bank safe, standing over 6 feet tall and weighing easily 2 tons. Its black enamel paint was surprisingly intact, bearing intricate gold leaf detailing and a heavy brass combination dial. Surrounding the safe were several wooden crates. David pried one open. Inside, packed in straw, were dozens of glass mason jars. But they weren't filled with preserves. They were filled with tightly rolled, wax-sealed documents. David broke the wax on one jar and pulled out a brittle, yellowed ledger. The handwriting was elegant, cursive, and dated. November the 14th, 1926. He scanned the pages. It was an inventory, not of farming equipment, but of serial numbers, bank routing codes, and names. Beside the numbers were massive sums of money: $50,000, $120,000, $250,000. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from the surface above. David froze. He killed his flashlight instantly, plunging the cellar into pitch blackness. Footsteps, heavy boots stomping across the wooden floorboards of the barn above. "Spread out!" a gruff voice echoed down the shaft. "Moreau said he's out here somewhere. Find the mechanic and find what he dug up." Panic gripped David's chest. Moreau hadn't waited. He had sent muscle. David backed slowly into the darkest corner of the cellar, slipping his hand into his pocket for his phone. No signal. He was 10 feet underground in a steel-reinforced bunker. He was completely cut off. A beam of light swept across the top of the stairs. "Hey, over here!" one of the men yelled. "He opened it! The trap door is open!" David looked around frantically in the dark. Beside the safe, his hand brushed against something heavy and metallic. An old iron pipe, left behind from the bunker's construction. He gripped it with both hands, his knuckles turning white. Heavy boots began to descend the concrete stairs. "Hello down there," the voice called out, mocking and cruel. "Mr. Mercer, Mr. Moreau wants to have a word." "Don't do anything stupid." The man reached the bottom of the stairs, shining his flashlight around. The beam swept past the safe, past the crates, and stopped dead on David. "Got him," the man sneered, pulling a heavy crowbar from his jacket. "All right, mechanic, up the stairs, now!" Adrenaline overrode David's fear. As the man stepped forward, David didn't retreat. He swung the iron pipe with everything he had, striking the man's flashlight hand. The flashlight shattered against the brick wall, plunging them back into darkness, accompanied by a howl of pain. David didn't wait. He lunged forward in the dark, tackling the man. They crashed into the wooden crates, splintering them. David scrambled to his feet, blindly racing up the concrete stairs, his lungs burning. He breached the surface, bursting out of the trap door into the dimly lit barn. The second man was waiting. He tackled David to the dirt, pressing a heavy forearm against David's throat. "Stop moving!" the man yelled. Suddenly, the blinding flash of red and blue lights illuminated the cracks in the barn walls. The wail of a police siren pierced the night. The man on top of David froze, cursing violently. He scrambled off, dragging his injured partner up from the trap door, and the two of them sprinted out the back of the barn, disappearing into the dense briars, just as Deputy Miller's cruiser fishtailed up the dirt driveway. David lay in the dirt, gasping for air. He had set a silent SOS timer on his phone to message the local sheriff's dispatch before he drove out to the property, just in case Moreau tried something. It had just saved his life. An hour later, the police had secured the perimeter. Deputy Miller, a veteran officer who had known David since he was a kid, stood over the trap door, shaking his head. "I've lived in this county for 50 years, David," Miller said, shining his light down into the bunker. "Nobody ever knew this was here, not even rumors." "They knew," David said, wiping blood from his lip. "Moreau knew." The next morning, under police protection, David hired a professional safecracker from Syracuse. It took 10 hours of drilling and manipulation before the heavy brass tumblers of the Mosler safe finally clicked. With a heavy groan, the thick steel door swung open. The police officers, the safecracker, and David all held their breath. Inside, stacked floor to ceiling, were canvas bank bags stamped with an eagle insignia. The ink was faded, but the words were unmistakable. United States Federal Reserve, 1928. David pulled one of the bags out. It was heavy. He untied the thick rope binding and dumped the contents onto the brick floor. It wasn't cash, it was gold. Dozens of heavy, gleaming gold bars clattered against the stone, untouched by time, shimmering in the beams of the halogen work lights. But beneath the gold, at the very bottom of the safe, was a small, velvet-lined mahogany box. David opened it. Inside were no jewels, no money. Just a stack of pristine, black-and-white photographs and a signed, notarized affidavit dated October the 30th, 1928. David picked up the first photograph. It showed a group of men standing proudly in front of a bank vault. David recognized Elias Farnsworth immediately, but the man standing next to him, shaking his hand, made David's blood run cold. It was a spitting image of Charles Moreau. David unfolded the affidavit. It was a detailed confession, signed by Elias Farnsworth. It chronicled the infamous 1928 Syracuse Trust heist, a robbery where $2 million in gold bullion vanished into thin air, a crime that baffled the Pinkerton Detective Agency for nearly a century. But the confession didn't just admit to the theft. It detailed exactly who masterminded the heist, who funded the operation, and who used the stolen Federal Reserve gold to build a massive, legitimate real estate empire in New York State. The signature of the mastermind was written clearly at the bottom of the page. Aidan Moreau, Charles Moreau's grandfather. David looked up from the paper, his heart hammering against his ribs. The gold in this safe was worth millions. But the piece of paper in his hands, to the Moreau family, it was worth everything. It was the proof that their entire billion-dollar legacy, their political influence, their pristine public image, was built on the greatest unsolved crime in state history. And now, David Mercer, the mechanic who bought an abandoned farm for $100 bill, held the match that could burn the Moreau empire to the ground. Word of the federal gold didn't just leak, it exploded. By sunrise, Route 104 was impassable. News vans, treasure hunters, and amateur sleuths had descended upon the Farnsworth property, their camera lenses pressed against the temporary chain-link fence erected by the Oswego County Sheriff's Department. David Mercer hadn't slept in 48 hours. He sat in the cramped, windowless office of Sheriff Wade, nursing a stale cup of black coffee. The heavy canvas bank bags of gold bullion had been transferred to a secure armored vehicle bound for the Federal Reserve branch in New York City, but the mahogany box and its damning contents remained in a heavy evidence lockbox on the sheriff's desk. "You understand the hornet's nest you just kicked, David?" Sheriff Wade asked, his weathered face etched with deep lines of exhaustion. "Charles Moreau owns half the commercial real estate in this state. He funds the campaigns of judges, mayors, and senators. And you just found the skeleton in his family's multi-billion-dollar closet." Before David could answer, the heavy wooden door to the office swung open. In walked Gordon Reed, Charles Moreau's lead attorney, a man whose $1,000 Italian suit looked wildly out of place in the dusty rural precinct. He slapped a thick manila folder onto the sheriff's desk. "Emergency injunction, Sheriff," Reed said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Signed by Judge Wallace Bennett at 6 a.m. this morning. The county tax auction has been declared procedurally invalid due to a gross clerical error regarding the property lines. Mr. Mercer's $100 purchase is void. The Farnsworth property and all its contents revert immediately to the county and consequently to the highest legitimate bidder, Moreau Heritage Real Estate." David felt the blood drain from his face. "You can't do that. The gavel fell. I paid the clerk. I have the deed." "You have a piece of paper that was stamped in error, Mr. Mercer," Reed sneered, not even looking at him. "The land isn't yours. The bunker isn't yours. And whatever you pulled out of that safe belongs to the rightful owners of the estate." "The rightful owners?" David shot back, rising to his feet. "You mean the Federal Reserve? Because that gold was stolen in 1928 by Aidan Moreau." Reed's eyes narrowed into terrifying slits. "I strongly advise you to watch your mouth, son. Slander is a very expensive game, and you don't even have the money to fix the transmission on your truck." Sheriff Wade picked up the injunction, adjusting his reading glasses. He sighed heavily. "The judge's signature is legitimate. I have to honor this, David. I'm sorry. You have to vacate the property." "And the box?" Reed demanded, pointing at the steel lockbox on the desk. "I have a secondary order right here demanding all non-monetary artifacts found on the property be surrendered to my client, as they pertain to his family's ancestral history on that land." David's mind raced. Moreau didn't care about the gold, A few million in bullion was pocket change to him. He cared about the paper, the affidavit, the photographic proof that his empire was built on a historic, violent crime. If Reed walked out of this station with that mahogany box, the truth would be incinerated before noon. "The box isn't here," David lied smoothly, his voice dropping an octave. Reed froze. "Excuse me." David looked the lawyer dead in the eye. "I didn't bring everything from the safe to the station. I kept the box. I read the affidavit, Gordon. I know exactly what Aidan Moreau did, and I hid it." Sheriff Wade opened his mouth to speak, but David shot him a desperate, pleading look. Wade paused, slowly closing his mouth and leaning back in his chair. "You're playing a very dangerous game," Reed whispered, the polished veneer cracking for a second. "Hand it over, Mercer. Now." "If your client wants it," David said, stepping closer to the lawyer, "he can come ask me for it himself, face to face. No lawyers, no thugs." Reed stared at him for a long, silent moment, then snatched his briefcase. "You will regret this," he hissed, turning on his heel and storming out of the office. Once the door clicked shut, Sheriff Wade let out a long breath. "David, the box is literally sitting right here. Why did you tell him you hid it?" "Because," David said, pulling his cell phone from his pocket, "if they confiscate it through a corrupt local judge, they win. But a crime involving stolen Federal Reserve gold and interstate bank fraud from 1928 isn't a local matter." David dialed a number he had looked up while waiting in the lobby. "Who are you calling?" Sheriff Wade asked. "The only people bigger than Charles Moreau," David replied as the line connected. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Syracuse Field Office. I need to report a $200 million federal theft." By noon, the quiet town of Oswego had become the epicenter of a massive federal operation. Special Agent Samuel Decker, a no-nonsense veteran of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, arrived via helicopter. He didn't talk about local property injunctions or Judge Bennett's rulings. $2 million in gold in 1928, Agent Decker explained, pacing the floor of the precinct. "Adjusted for inflation and the current market price of gold, you just handed the federal government back roughly $200 million. But this affidavit, this is the real prize." Decker carefully examined the brittle, yellowed paper in the mahogany box. "The Moreau Empire is heavily leveraged. They rely on federal contracts, government subsidies, and a pristine public image. If we can prove their foundational capital was stolen from the U.S. government, the RICO Act allows us to seize their assets. All of them." "Can you arrest him?" David asked. "Not just for what his grandfather did," Decker admitted. "You can't inherit a crime. We need to tie Charles Moreau directly to an ongoing criminal conspiracy to cover it up, or prove he actively ordered the assault on you to suppress federal evidence." David looked at the map of the county on the wall. He thought about the medical debt that had nearly crushed him. He thought about the local businesses Moreau had bullied into bankruptcy over the decades. "I told his lawyer I hid the evidence," David said slowly. "Moreau will do anything to get it. He'll buy it, he'll steal it, or he'll have me killed for it." Agent Decker stopped pacing and looked at David, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Are you offering to wear a wire, Mr. Mercer?" "I want my farm back," David said firmly, "and I want that man to pay for what he's done to this town." The midnight air was biting and damp as David pulled his rusted Ford truck to the edge of the Farnsworth property. The police tape had been torn down, replaced by private security signs bearing the Moreau Heritage logo. David stepped out of the truck, carrying a heavy canvas duffel bag. Beneath his thick flannel jacket, a sophisticated federal recording device was taped to his chest. Hidden in the tree line, a quarter-mile away, Agent Decker and an FBI tactical team monitored his every heartbeat. The massive, leaning dairy barn loomed in the darkness. The sliding doors were already open. Inside, A single halogen work light cast long, aggressive shadows across the dirt floor. Standing beside the excavated trap door was Charles Moreau. He was flanked by the same two men who had attacked David the night before. One of them had his hand heavily bandaged. "You have a lot of nerve coming back here, Mercer," Moreau called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You wanted the box, Charles," David said, walking slowly into the barn. He kept his distance, stopping 20 feet away. "I figured we could make a deal, since your lawyer managed to steal my land out from under me." Moreau chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "The world belongs to those who write the rules, David. My grandfather understood that. I understand that. You? You're just a grease monkey who got lucky with a crowbar. Your grandfather was a bank robber," David said flatly, ensuring the microphone caught every word. "He stole $2 million in federal gold and used it to buy up this county. And you knew about it." "Of course I knew about it," Moreau snapped, stepping forward, his eyes burning with arrogance. "Why do you think I've been trying to buy this toxic wasteland for a decade? Elias Farnsworth was a paranoid fool. When he realized the Pinkertons were never going to stop looking for the gold, he buried it here and hid the ledger. He vanished, and the state locked the property in probate hell. I couldn't touch it until yesterday's auction." "So you sent your men to assault me," David pressed, hoping to secure the final piece of the federal puzzle. "You sent them to silence me." Moreau gestured to the two enforcers. "They were overzealous, but effective. Now stop wasting my time. You said you have the affidavit. Name your price. 1 million? 5? Moreau pulled out his checkbook, the same gold fountain pen, catching the halogen light. "I will write you a check for $10 million right now, Mercer. You walk away, you keep your mouth shut, and you go live like a king on a beach somewhere. Or my associates here bury you at the bottom of that bunker, and I tear this barn down over your corpse. Your choice." David looked at the checkbook. $10 million. It was more money than he could comprehend. It was freedom, security, luxury. But as he looked at Moreau's sneering face, David realized something. It wasn't about the money. It was about the power. And right now, the mechanic held all of it. "I don't want your money, Charles," David said softly. He unzipped the duffel bag and pulled out a pair of heavy iron bolt cutters. Not the mahogany box. Moreau's face fell. "Where is it?" "It's safe," David said, "with the FBI." The silence in the barn was absolute. Moreau's breath hitched. He looked at David, then out into the darkness of the surrounding woods, sudden realization crashing down on him. "Kill him!" Moreau screamed, his aristocratic composure shattering completely. "Kill him right now!" The two enforcers reached into their jackets. Before they could draw their weapons, the wooden walls of the barn seemed to explode. Blinding strobe lights pierced the darkness as the sliding doors at both ends of the building were violently thrown open. "FBI, drop your weapons! Get on the ground!" A dozen federal agents in tactical gear swarmed the barn, laser sights cutting through the dust, pinning Moreau and his men in a web of red dots. The enforcers wisely threw their hands in the air, dropping to their knees in the dirt. Moreau didn't move. He stood frozen, staring at the dirt floor, his gold pen slipping from his fingers. Agent Decker stepped out from the shadows, walking calmly toward the billionaire. "Charles Moreau," Decker said, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, assault, bribery, and the possession of stolen federal assets. Furthermore, your corporate assets have been frozen pending a federal RICO investigation." Moreau was violently shoved against the side of the wooden barn, his hands pulled behind his back. As Decker clicked the cuffs shut, Moreau looked over his shoulder at David, his eyes wild with rage. "You're nobody!" Moreau spat, spit flying from his lips. "I am Charles Moreau. I own this town. You're nothing but a mechanic." David walked up to him, picking up the discarded gold fountain pen from the dirt. He tucked it neatly into Moreau's breast pocket. "I'm the guy who outbid you for $100, David said. 6 months later, the dust had finally settled in Oswego County. The Moreau empire had collapsed like a house of cards. The federal government seized billions in real estate, liquidating the company to pay restitution to decades of victims. Charles Moreau was denied bail, facing life in federal prison. Judge Wallace Bennett was indicted for judicial corruption, and the emergency injunction against David's property was ripped to shreds. David Mercer didn't just get his 80-acre farm back. Under the obscure federal laws regarding the recovery of stolen Treasury assets, the government awarded David a 10% finder's fee for the $200 million in gold he had unearthed. He didn't buy a mansion, and he didn't move to a beach. David paid off his medical debts, bought a brand new set of tools, and hired a crew to tear down the rotting barn. In its place, he built a massive, state-of-the-art auto restoration garage, flooded with natural light and standing on solid, honest concrete. The old Farnsworth place was no longer a symbol of decay or a secret tomb for stolen wealth. It was just a farm again, bought for a single $100 bill, and a reminder that no matter how deep you bury the truth, all it takes is one person willing to dig. If you were captivated by this incredible, true-to-life story of hidden treasure, corporate greed, and the ultimate underdog victory, make sure to hit that like button. We bring you the most thrilling, jaw-dropping mysteries and unearthed secrets every single week. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a good plot twist, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you found millions under your floorboards?